All right. You guys remember, it was a little more than a month ago up in West Virginia. There was a mine shaft. There was an explosion in a mine shaft, and there were all these miners that were trapped down there. And there was only one survivor, and he was in a coma for a little while. And you guys remember this story, right? I was reading an article about these men earlier today, and they found notes, you know. One of the notes from 51-year-old mine foreman Martin Toller Jr. One of the notes, it was really bad scribbling block letters. Their best guess is that this was written towards the end of this man's life. Here's what he says: "Tell all I'll see them on other side." Another note says, "It wasn't bad. I just went to sleep. I love you." One other note says, "Your dad didn't suffer." In August of 2000, there were 118 crew members on a Russian submarine that sank. I don't know if you remember this or not. And they found a note. 27-year-old Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov wrote a note, and he could only manage 2 words. And the 2 words he wrote, "Mustn't despair." It's unclear from that note who he was writing to. Was he writing that to his family, or was he writing that to himself? We don't know. There are very few people who actually are aware of their own death, who actually can see it coming with that kind of clarity. Most people who die either are unaware of what's happening, or it kind of sneaks up on them, and they don't get to see it approaching them as steadily as that. But for these men trapped in a mine, they knew what was coming. For these men who are trapped in a submarine, they knew what was coming. The death was unavoidable for them. And what people who study this kind of thing say is that one consistent thing that happens when people are that consciously aware that they are dying is they all feel compelled to communicate with somebody. There are records of people who went down in that plane in Pennsylvania on 9/11 sending text messages to people. In fact, there's a project called Lost and Found Sound that a company produced, what they called audio artifacts, or a sonic memorial to the victims of 9/11, because some of those people who were trapped in that building, when they knew it was coming down and they knew there was no hope for them, what a lot of them did was they went to the phones and called people. And unfortunately, because it happened during the business day, a lot of people were at work and they got voicemail, and they left voicemail records of where they were and what they were doing and what was happening to them right then. And they left a memorial that way. They reached out to people. And it's interesting that when death becomes unavoidable, people feel the need to reach out. Because I think in those moments when everything else is kind of stripped away and life is reduced to its bare minimum, all the scaffolding gets torn down. All the things that you've spent your life chasing after, the gadgets and the promotions and the house in the suburbs and the luxury automobile, when you're in that moment and you realize, I'm not getting out of here alive, you recognize what's really important to you. And all you're left with is what you believe and the kind of person you've become and what you've built your life upon. And it all becomes very clear in that moment. Prisoners in Nazi camps, concentration camps, would write notes, scribble notes, and just stick them into the wall wherever they could in hopes that someone would read them and know a little bit of their story. And a lot of times, those notes and those communications express some form of regret. Regret over things left undone, regret over opportunities or potential left unmet, or usually, a lot of times, regret over having to leave this life so soon. I wish I could stay here longer. I wish I could live a little bit longer. And let me just ask you, before we get into this story, if that happened to you, what would you write? I mean, if tonight was your night, and you knew it, and you could see it coming, what would you write? Who would you call? What's the voicemail you would leave? The sonic memorial that you would want to be played after you were gone, or the note you would want to be pinned up at your funeral. What would that be? Open to Daniel chapter 3 if you have a copy of the Old Testament. In Daniel chapter 3, if you weren't here last week, this is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And most people are somewhat familiar with this story. Even if you're not a Bible student, most people know a little bit about this story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, usually when this story is presented, it's presented as just kind of three random kids, teenagers or whatever, and they may have been young people, but they're not just kind of average, run-of-the-mill people, are they? They're people of status. We saw at the end of Daniel chapter 2 that they've been elevated. They've been promoted. They're overseeing a lot of other people. There are a lot of people who report to them. So they're fairly important people, men of status. And think about their lives. Okay, you could go all the way back to when they lived in the southern kingdom in Jerusalem. They were part of the first wave of people who were brought out by Babylon. And that means that they were part of the cultural elite. They were high society even back in Jerusalem. And back then, they would have had some kind of picture of what their life was going to play out like, They had some idea, because when you come from a fairly affluent home, you have an idea of what your life's going to be like. You're going to graduate from high school, and then you're going to go to college, and then you're going to meet the right person. You're going to get the right job. You're going to settle down, and you're going to have the right kind of kids, and you're going to live in the right kind of house, and that's kind of what your life's going to be like. And you have this general idea that life is going to work out a certain way. And then all of a sudden, they're transported 700 miles away to a totally different place. And they think, well, this is not what I had in mind at all. But God causes the people there to look on them with favor. And so they are all of a sudden promoted in a foreign land. Who would have thought that they would end up being in management in this foreign land? And so now they've got to think, I have a pretty good idea of how my life's going to turn out. It's probably going to be a lot like I imagined it when I was growing up, except it's not going to be in Jerusalem, it's going to be here. But I'm going to have the right job. I make good money. I'm going to buy the right kind of house. I'm going to marry the right kind of person. We're going to have the right kind of kids. And we're going to drive the right kind of cars. And that's going to be life. And all of a sudden they find themselves here. And you don't build a 90-foot high statue overnight. So they had to see this statue going up. It had to take a while. They saw it being built out there. And at some point in time they would have seen it and said, this is not going to end well. And they're in positions of authority. And so I have a hard time imagining that the first time they heard that you have to bow down to this idol was the day of. I have a hard time imagining. They would have heard rumors or something about this. Do you think they prayed about it? I imagine they did, especially you look at what's just happened to them in Daniel chapter 2 with the interpretation of the dream, and they saw God just really intervene in a supernatural sort of way. They had to have prayed about this before, and they probably prayed about it. They probably prayed their whole 700-mile journey from Jerusalem to Babylon. They probably prayed the whole time they were in training in the king's court. They prayed that whole night with Daniel. They probably prayed the entire time this construction project was going on. And at every step, the door was closed to them. And for them, and this is where it gets really different from most notes that are left behind. There's no expression of regret. I wish I could stay here longer in this chapter. Because they could have stayed here longer. Their death was not entirely unavoidable. They could have aborted this whole mess. They could just say the word, just say the right word, and we'll pretend this didn't happen at all. Look at chapter 3, verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. We'll just pretend this whole thing didn't happen. You can go right back to doing what you've always been doing. You draw your regular salary, and no one has to know. This won't go on your permanent record. But if you do not worship it, you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? See, they could have gotten out of this. And this is really, really important for us to hear, okay? Because there are times when God gives you an idea, or let me say it this way. There are times when you have an idea of what your future is going to look like. And it's fairly reasonable for you to assume that God gave you that vision of what the future will be like. God orchestrated my circumstances to bring me where I am today. He's elevated me to a certain position, to certain status. He's put me in a place where I have been looked on with favor by others. I have a pretty good idea that God wants me to do this thing. Okay? And here's what happens. The potential to take a shortcut, to speed that process up, comes along. And all it will take is for you to compromise your integrity once. Just one time. Just say to God, "Listen, thanks for bringing me here and all this kind of stuff. Thanks for giving me that vision of what the future is. I need to go over here for just a minute and do a couple of things, and I'd rather you not see what I'm getting ready to do. So, you stay here. I'm going to go over there for a few minutes, and I'll come right back. Okay? You stay here. I'm not going away forever. I'm just this one time because this will speed up the process to get me further down the line in what you have for me in my future. Okay? You just stay here just for a couple of minutes. Okay, God? And I'll be right back." I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who say it started like that. I said, "I'm just going to do this one time, okay, God? Because this will help. The money I get from that, I'm going to give it to missions. I'm going to give it to the church. If I get that promotion, think how much more influence I'll have. Okay, God, this is going to help us, okay? I just have to do this one thing one time." Maybe tempted to compromise. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't go in for that, okay? All they had to do was do it one time, and they would not do it. And here's the other thing I want you to remember. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, like everybody else in the Old Testament we've read about, they're just regular people. They're just regular guys. They're not super extraordinary exceptions to the rule. They're regular people like you and like me. And what that means is this kind of devotion really is possible for us. It really is possible for us to have this kind of tenacious faith. Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and He will rescue us from your hand, O king. But," oh, what a great statement of faith, "but even if He does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." We will not avoid this. We didn't go looking for this. This was not our plan. We didn't say what's the best way we can get martyred here. But we're not going to turn away from it. And look at 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. Does anybody have a King James?
The expression on his face changed.
Yeah, the King James says his countenance changed, or the expression on his face changed. So if you can imagine, his whole posture towards them changed. If you remember earlier, the verses that we started with up in verse 15, his attitude towards them is he's kind of got this velvet glove approach to them. All right, now, I'm going to give you one more chance. If you bow down and worship it, then we'll just pretend this whole thing didn't happen, all right? And he's very nice, very cordial at that point in time. And at this point, in the face of that kind of devotion, he's so enraged. He just loses control. Look at the end of that verse. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Now, a word about this. In the Bible, a lot of times the word, the number 7 is used, and it's usually used symbolically for a lot. That's really what the word 7 means a lot of times in the Old Testament, a lot. Okay? The proverb says that a fool thinks he is wiser than 7 men who answer with discernment. It just means he thinks he's wiser than a lot of people. And there are other proverbs, even though the righteous falls 7 times, he rises again, even though he falls a lot. So 7 just means a lot. So he's heated the furnace up a lot. That's what he says. Make it as hot as you can get it. That's really what this verse is getting at. Now, I don't know if you've thought about this, but when you burn yourself, it hurts. I mean, it's so simple and so basic. But when we lived in Texas, and we only had, when Annabelle was first learning how to walk, we had a nice, spacious kitchen, and she was learning to walk. And the way Annabelle learned to walk was, we had just moved to Texas when she was learning to walk, and so we had a lot of boxes that we were unpacking with, and she got these cardboard boxes, like book boxes, because I have a lot of books. They're the perfect height for a toddler who's learning to walk. And so she would put her hands on these boxes and kind of push them around, and that's how she would learn to walk, kind of like she was with a walker or something like that. And so my wife thought that she was kind of occupying herself with that box over there. My wife was making dinner. And, it's very, very tricky. You got to have the timing just right when you have toddlers in your house. She opens the oven, gets something out of the oven, turns to put it on the counter, and Annabelle turned and fell into the oven. Now, she caught herself with her hands, so she didn't fall with her whole body, but she caught herself with her hands. It just fell right into the oven. And blistered her hands really badly. And it just taught her a very, very healthy respect for an open oven. And it's a terrible way to learn. I would not recommend that as parents, that we do that to our kids. But even to this day, when the oven is open, Annabelle is nowhere to be found. She's like a cat, when a cat, just under the sofa. She's hiding from the oven, And anytime the oven is open, she will tackle her sisters if her sisters get anywhere close to it, because she has such a healthy respect for being burned. Shortly after Jill and I got married, my father received an award. My father, I love my father more than just about anybody on the planet, and I would do just about anything for him. And he received an award from an organization called Toastmasters. You guys know what Toastmasters is? Now, my father's not a member of Toastmasters, but some people at his church are. And so they decided to give him the highest award Toastmasters gives to a public speaker who is not a member of Toastmasters. I don't know what this... It's like a cult or something, None of you are members of Toastmasters, are you? I didn't mean to say it's a cult. It's a club. It's a nice, healthy, fun club. Oh, I'm in so much trouble. Okay, so they decided to give him this big award, but the problem is my father had to be out of the country at the time of the awards banquet. So he called me and asked me if I would go and accept the award on his behalf. And I had to give a speech to Toastmasters. I got up and I broke every rule that they have, like in the first 15 seconds. I stuttered and stammered and said, and they have all kinds of crazy rules. And but I received this award. Now, the thing is, I told my father I would do it. It was a Friday night, and my wife and I had scheduled a weekend skiing. we're supposed to drive up to the mountains Friday night. And we're going to meet some friends up there and have the weekend skiing. Well, we said, okay, no problem. We'll go to the awards banquet. I'll do the speech, and we'll get the award, and then we'll drive up to the mountains, and we'll go skiing. Okay, great. The problem is, Toastmasters people, even though they're supposed to have a time limit, don't always follow their own rules. And so there were 100 speeches that had to go before me. And it was so late at night. People are falling asleep. And it's like 10 o'clock at night. And I'm watching, and I'm thinking, and I'm up on the podium, I'm up on the big platform. And so I can't, because and so it's so late at night. We get the award, and we get in the car. It's after 10 o'clock at night. We have a long 3-hour drive up to the mountains. We get halfway up the mountain. I'm not kidding. Up this narrow 2-lane road, and there's an accident. On a 2-lane mountain road, and it's something that's turned sideways. I never even got the whole story, but it's something that had turned sideways. So we're in this big, long line of traffic. They tell everyone we have to turn around, go back down the mountain, drive around the mountain, come up over the mountain the other side. So it's literally 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning when we get there. Okay, it's so late, and I'm so tired and frustrated, the whole thing. We get there, we get to our cabin, and it's colder inside our cabin than it is outside our cabin. Okay? I go, and there's a furnace that was just not working at all. The furnace didn't work at all. But they have a fireplace. So, 3:30 in the morning, because my wife says she's cold, and we've been married for like 12 weeks. Okay, so I'll build a fire. You stay here. I'll go get wood. I go and I'm picking up sticks and little things, and I don't know. Will this burn? I don't care, So come in, and I stack this huge thing up, and boy, it won't light. It won't light. It won't light. I go into the kitchen. I find lighter fluid in the kitchen. So I'm like, okay, I wasn't very wise at it, but I'm determined. We're going to warm this place up. So I start the fire, and it's just this roaring fire. The problem is, the flue was not open. So now, the whole place is filled with just black smoke. You can't even see. And the smoke alarm goes off. So the furnace doesn't work, but the smoke alarm does. Okay? And it's way up high on a ceiling, and you can't get to it unless you throw a shoe at it. Which I did. And so I get that turned off, and then I remember, wait a sec, because it takes, you're throwing the thing to get the thing to shut up, and then you remember, the flue is still closed. So I go and I reach in, and you could see the label of the manufacturer on my hand. And I immediately ran outside and stuck my hand in the snow and just refused to come. I was like a wounded bird out there, It doesn't take much to give you a healthy respect for being burned. Now imagine Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We've all been burnt. We've all bumped up against a stove. We've all touched an iron or a curling iron or something. We've all had most of us at least, have had some experience with being burned in the past, and it's not a pleasant experience, not something you want to repeat. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego know what's waiting for them. And on top of that, burning people alive has historically been among the most cruel, and it's an expression of contempt. It's not just physical torture. It says to the person, I don't even want remains left. I don't want a corpse that people can bury, which in that society was huge. Historically, burning people alive has been reserved for witches and heretics and people that society doesn't even want a record of, not even a gravestone. It's painful, it's cruel, it's inhumane. And this is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stare in the face. And they could stop it. at any time. Anytime they wanted to. Any one of them could have said, "Oh, wait a second. Well, what do I have to do again?" They could have turned this whole thing around. And who would have known? And it just had to be once. God, just this one time. You stay over here, okay? You stay right here. I'm going to go over there and do something that I don't want you to see. So you stay here, okay? I'm going over there and I'll be right back. I promise. Verse 21. So these men wearing, and remember we talked last week about lists? Listen to this list. They're wearing robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes. The writer is very concerned that we know that they have hats and pants on. I mean, he really wants us to know this, that they're wearing all this stuff. Robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. And the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. They're tied up. They have to be carried. They can't even walk. So they are bound. Okay? And the furnace is so hot that the soldiers drop. And details, again, very important to this writer. And because he wants us to see, Nebuchadnezzar is so out of control here that he is willing to kill some of his own men without even thinking twice about it. And there's no hope now. These are immobilized bodies being thrown into a fire. And they saw this coming. And at every step, you got to imagine, they prayed. When he made them the offer, they had to pray about that. I think they had to have. When the furnace was being stoked up to be made hotter than it was, they had to pray about that. It must have taken time to bind these guys, and they had to pray about that. And then soldiers pick them up and carry them. And while they're being carried, they got to be praying about this. These are real people. Let's not make them into people that they're not. Real people, filled, I'm sure, with a mixture of courage and fear. And questions. Hey, God, wait a second, God. Hey, wait, whoa, God, hey, God, hello, God. Where are you now? They feel the heat. And they see the guards drop. And they expect the worst. And they get thrown in. And then, nothing. Not even, it's not even warm. Their clothes don't heat up at all. Nothing. It had to have been like a moment of, wait a second, have I gone numb? Is my life flashing before my eyes? What is happening here? Nothing. No burns, no smoke, and they're not even tied up anymore. They're walking around in there. But that's not the best part. Listen, the best part is what happens that turns this from just being a miracle into being a divine encounter. Okay? Look at verse 24. King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement. One translation has the word trepidation, with trepidation here, because it includes kind of a little element of fear. And he asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? And they replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. There's a 4th guy in there. It's a 4th member of the furnace club. And apparently, he's the one who untied the other 3. Okay? And they have this little meeting in there. So who is that guy? Just appears from nowhere, and he can cheat death, and he looks in appearance like a son of the gods. Who is that? Well, text doesn't say, but I think we know who it is. I think it's Jesus. Because that's just the kind of thing He would do. That's just the kind of thing He would do. Listen, I could deliver you from this. And sometimes I will, and sometimes I won't. But I'm not going to leave you. Whether you're delivered from it or whether you go through it, I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to meet you right there. And they have, this is like the world's first small group, meeting in the fire, right there. Okay? And you know what I wonder? I wonder what they talked about. I wonder what they said to each other. I mean, I can only speculate, but again, what's the kind of thing Jesus would say? I bet Jesus would tell them, you know how proud my Father is of you? You know, we were all up there watching this, and we're so proud of the way you have not shrunk from this challenge. And I bet He called them by their old names, by their Jewish names, the ones that had God in them. And I wonder if He told them, your names, not your old names, but your new ugly names, I bet these new names are going to be known for thousands of years. And that millennia from now, there will be a group of people sitting in an overheated room in the suburbs of Atlanta talking about you. I wonder if He told them that. That their names would be remembered on the other side of the world by a totally different culture, speaking a totally different language. And that for centuries, men and women who faced persecution because of their belief that Jesus is the only way to be reconciled with the Father, when they faced persecution, they would think of your names. And they would be strengthened and encouraged by just thinking about your names and what you've done. I wonder what they said to Him. I wonder what they said to that fourth guy. I bet they said thank you. You know? I bet they couldn't have stopped saying thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know? Anne Lamott says there are really only two kinds of prayers. Help me, help me, help me, and thank you, thank you, thank you. You know? I bet that's what they prayed. I bet that's what they said. And I bet this turned into a moment of worship and thanksgiving that marked them for the rest of their lives. I mean, I wonder if they got together on the anniversary of this event, you know, and lit a little bonfire and talked about what was going on. You know, I wonder if they got together. I wonder if they told their grandkids this story. The amazing thing about these guys is this is the last we ever hear of them. Don't hear another word about them in the whole Bible. But I bet they told this story. I bet they rehearsed it over and over again. Hey, do you remember that time? Oh, yeah. Oh, that was cool, wasn't it? See, here's the amazing thing. The furnace, the thing they probably were most afraid of, turned out to be the place they met God. The place where they have an encounter that changes them for the rest of their lives. And that's the whole point of the story. They were hoping to get delivered from the furnace, but God decided to deliver them in the furnace. Sometimes God delivers us from the furnace, and sometimes He says, I'll meet you there. And sometimes life looks really scary. And we don't know what's around the corner. Sometimes we do know what's around the corner. Sometimes the doctor has come back and he said, this is what you can expect. And it ain't good. And sometimes you go to see your therapist and your therapist says, this is what looks like happening. And so prepare yourself for the worst. You know what's coming. And you brace yourself and you pray to God, please deliver me from this. Please not that. Please anything but that. And you end up going through it. And usually it's only later, years later, when you have time to reflect on it, and you say, that may have been the best thing that ever happened to me. See, I have this idea in my mind of God having a calendar. Now, God doesn't have a calendar because He's everywhere all at the same time, and so He never has to, be reminded to go somewhere because He's already there. But that'll kind of mess with your head. But I have this idea of God with a big calendar, and on that date, at whatever time that was, if it's February 22nd, 7:20 12 BC or 512 BC or whatever the year was, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and on his calendar it says, meet Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. And so God was there before they were. And sometimes I wonder, what if they hadn't shown up? I mean, what if they had said, God, you just hang out here for just a minute. I'm going to go over there. I'll be right back. And they miss this appointment that's been on God's calendar. Sometimes, because we so resist discomfort, maybe we miss these amazing appointments that God wants to keep with us. See, God says, you follow me. And sometimes we'll have fun, and sometimes we're going to have a hard time. But we're going to do this together, okay? And when it looks really dark, and when it looks really scary, you trust me, you follow me, and I'll meet you in the furnace. Let's keep going. Verse 26. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace. And he doesn't say it, but I bet he approached it from a distance. He probably didn't get too close, okay? And he approached the opening of the blazing furnace, and he shouted. So that's why I know that he had to be from far away. He shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Wouldn't you love to see that? Just walking out. Well, hey, how are you? And they're looking at their clothes, and there's no burn, they don't even smell like fire. And the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. And they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, no smell of fire on them. You remember back in verse 21, he goes into great detail about what they had on, what kind of clothes they were wearing, robes, trousers, turbans, other clothes. Why does he do that? I think the clothing that he names is a little bit obscure. Okay? In different translations, it's called different things. I think that the term translated robe is a covering, and maybe it said the king threw me in a fiery furnace. All I got was this lousy T-shirt or something like that. I don't know what it said, but all they come out with, they come out with it with the clothes on their back. You remember when the children of Israel were wandering around in the desert for 40 years? They come out, and Moses says, "Your sandals didn't wear out, did they?" See, God was protecting you the whole time. Verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command." Well, wait a second. Defied the king's command. Who's the king? Nebuchadnezzar's the king. Nebuchadnezzar, the guy who killed his own soldiers, okay, and doesn't even register with him. And now he congratulates these three guys for having the audacity to defy his authority. Something is going on in this guy's life, okay? And we'll talk about that more a little bit next week. But they trusted in him and defied the king's commands and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. Do you remember that phrase? Do you remember that phrase from chapter 2? He says, that's what's going to happen if you can't tell me my dream. Your houses are going to be turned into piles of rubble. You'll be cut into pieces. It's interesting. What does he say after Daniel tells him his dream? He says, there's no God like your God. And now he says, no one say anything bad about their God. There's movement in the most unlikely character. God's doing something. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He doesn't just restore them. He actually promotes them, gives them new opportunities, new places to serve, greater influence. And again, I wonder what the rest of their lives were. I wonder if on the anniversary, if they got out those old robes and put them on. And their wives wanted to throw them away because they don't fit anymore, but they still put them on. To remind themselves. You remember what that felt like? You remember how we were right up there at the edge and we didn't know what was going to happen. They threw us in there. You remember what that was like? Going into the furnace, which looked like the last thing in the world they would want to do, turned out to be the greatest event of their lives. Had to be. Hands down. And ironically enough, the furnace which looks like certain death, turns out to be the safest place they could have been in all the world. Because God was there. And I mention this because there is this great danger for us. Because of when we live. Because of how we live. I think the greatest danger for us is to make the primary goal of our own lives comfort. And to pray, God, make my life comfortable. Give me that promotion, if it be thy will. Let us get that house. I know those other people put an offer on it, but they're not Christians. They don't go to this church. We deserve that house. We'll host a small group if you let us have that house. Make my life smooth. Make my life easy. Make it comfortable. Make it pleasant. Remove all the obstacles from me. And we avoid even real low-level flames. God, it's kind of hot in this room. Would you just please turn the air conditioning on? You know, we don't even like it to be warm. Sometimes God says, I'll deliver you from the furnace. And sometimes God says, I'll meet you there. And I wonder if you've ever, and I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit dangerous, okay? And no one can force you to do this tonight, and no one will know if you did it or you didn't do it, okay? But I wonder if you would do this. At least consider it. Stop asking God for less heat. And start asking God for an opportunity to meet Him in the furnace. See, I have people sometimes come to me and they'll say, oh, my work. People at my work, they're just godless, heathen, pagan people, and I wish God would deliver me from that and put me in let me work in a Christian environment. And maybe sometimes that is appropriate. I can't say for your situation, but what if God wants you right there? And what if you stop praying for less heat? God, make my life more comfortable. Make it easier for me to be a Christian at work. And maybe, what if you started praying, God, meet me there? See, it's amazing how often the human heart, the spirits and emotions of potentially glorious creatures that we are, made in the image of God, how we get so attached and wrapped up and bound up and enslaved by just comfort. By trivial things. Somebody cuts you off on the freeway and you get bent all out of shape. Somebody gives you a look and it hurts your feelings. Somebody doesn't give you the recognition that you think you deserve. Somebody interrupts your important time. Is my career not going well enough? Did somebody create an obstacle and put that in my life? And I'm just telling you, I think something, as we go through this study, and as we have been going through this study, I think God is calling us to a deeper level of courage than we've ever demonstrated before. And I would ask you just to say, God, give me an opportunity to meet you in the furnace. Instead of just saying, God, make things smooth and easy and comfortable for me, say, God, meet me right there in the place where it's most difficult. And let that be a divine encounter. And just talk to God about this. And maybe it's at work. Or maybe it's at school. Or maybe it's maybe you have people in your life who are so far from God and they have habits that so really turn your stomach. And you want to be in an easier environment, and you just wish God would remove them or change them or do whatever. Maybe you just pray to God, God, meet me right there. Next time I have an encounter with that person, you meet me there. Maybe we need to stop praying for deliverance from the furnace and ask for the presence of the God who meets people there. And so let's take right now, and I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to ask God for whatever you want to ask God to do, and then I'll close this in prayer. Holy Father, as we reflect back on the lives of these great heroes of faith, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, and before them, back to Josiah, to Hezekiah, to Isaiah and Jeremiah, to Elijah, and to David, to Samuel, to Gideon, to Moses, Joshua, these great pillars of faith, Abraham and Joseph. We look at their lives, certainly Paul and Peter and Jesus, and we recognize that they didn't have smooth sailing and comfort their entire time. Nowhere do I see a promise from Jesus that says, follow me and I'll make your life comfortable. And so, Father, I repent for all the times where I've made comfort my primary motive, and all the times where I've treated you like you're just a vending machine. I put my prayers in, I put my Bible study in, and I expect my blessing to come out. God, I pray for me personally this week that you will present me with opportunities to meet with you in the furnace, to meet with you in the place of anxiety, in the place of fear, in the place of danger, and that I will be able to have the courage and strength of character that your Spirit wants to build in me, that I will yield to your promptings and your leadings, and that I will not pull back from where you want me to go, and that you will, by whatever means necessary, continue to shape my character into the image of Jesus. That's my prayer for me. That's my prayer for everyone in this room. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. We'll see you guys next week.